if you ride a horse up to a bar in northern Wisconsin, you don't pay for a drink. And as it turns out, there is a Matthew Barnes, who's a felon, has the same birthday.
Oh, good golly.
Surprise, surprise. Generally speaking, if you're a drug dealer in Wausau, we know you're a drug dealer in Wausau. And I'll just never forget, we come walking out of this house, and they're all standing in their front yards clapping.
So I am Lieutenant Nate Pauls with the Wausau Police Department, talking with Chief Matt Barnes. We had some structural changes over this past year, and Matt was donned Chief of the Wausau Police Department early September of 2023 after being here for approximately 24 years. But before we can talk about Matt, the Chief of Police, I think we need to go back to where this all started. Before you came to Wausau, you were in Ohio, I believe. Is that correct?
Yeah, my dad was an officer in the Marine Corps, so every 3 or 4 years we moved. Both my parents grew up in Wisconsin, so upon his retirement from the Marine Corps, their goal was to live as far north in Wisconsin as they could make a living, and so that's ended up in Wausau.
When you moved here, you also had some siblings, an older brother,
Yep.
a younger sister, and a younger brother.
Like, we should probably go back just a little bit where Lieutenant Pauls or Nate knows this because we graduated from high school together. So same graduating year, and so I know who his siblings are. He knows who mine are. But yeah, I had an older brother that was a year and a half older than me. I have a sister that's a year and a half younger, and then we had the youngest brother.
Yeah, ironically, we have the same amount of siblings, and they're the same years apart.
The same age.
The same age all the way through. So
yeah, it's really interesting that your older brother and my older brother graduated together. You and I graduated together. My sister and your sister graduated together, and Joe and Natalie graduated together.
Yeah, and I believe actually our sisters roomed together for a short stint in Madison in college.
Think so. I think you're right.
So yeah, bringing this all full circle. But like I said, when you came here from Ohio, you had your siblings to rely on, but you didn't know anybody in the area, correct? So you had to start from scratch at the high school age to make friends.
Pretty much.
And did you find being a part of a club or starting in a sport, did that help with that process for you?
Yeah, I think that, well, there were a couple things. Because of the closeness in age with siblings, so you get to know people your age. In a year and a half, everybody's close enough in age, so getting involved in sports, like immediately you get to meet a few people, and then once you get to school, you get to meet people. And my passion at that point in time was going hunting and fishing, and the idea that you could walk out your back door and go hunting. You didn't get to do that in Cleveland, Ohio. The police would be called if you decided you were going to walk out the back door and go hunting. So to come here, and then you connect with people with similar interests. There were less people with those interests in Cleveland than here. So I feel very fortunate that my parents chose to come to Wausau. It's looking back on it, I have fond memories of that, and it's set me up to where I am today to some degree.
So, I mean, that's a good high school experience for the most part. But if I recall, I do believe you may have had your first draw and interest in law enforcement in high school, and I think you had intimate contact with our school resource officer at the time. And I don't recall if it was a counseling session or if you were given a citation for some random driving behavior around some mud puddles by the high school.
Really? You're going to go there with this? Well, I fancied myself entertaining. And in the old Wausau East, see that, like at some point we're going to talk about our age and at what point we realized we're the old guys here.
I think we passed that about a decade
and when that
ago.
occurred. But the old Wausau East, upon major rain, would get this enormous puddle right at the back of the school. And like, this is horrible. I feel really bad about this at this point. See, now you're making me laugh. I'm saying it's horrible, and now I'm chuckling as I think about it. But here's this giant puddle. Here's me behind the wheel. And here's a half a dozen or so people that are standing right next to the puddle. And I just remember thinking, like, if that were me, I wouldn't stand next to that puddle with the type of people driving around this school. So my car may have veered into that puddle and sent a tidal wave over them. And so, being a dumb kid, I thought that was funny, and other people thought it was funny until the next day. I'm in class, maybe 9 o'clock in the morning, and a note comes down to the school, or down to the classroom, and it's like, hey, you're needed in the office. And I'm like, oh, okay, and not even thinking about it. And here's a police officer, and who knew who I was, and all he said to me was, hey, did you do it? And I looked at him, I said, yep. And he said, here's your ticket for disorderly conduct with a motor vehicle. And I looked at him, I said, I'm pretty sure I got that coming. And my wallet was a little bit lighter, and now I drive around puddles, especially when there's people around.
Well, it was a good learning moment at a young age. I would interpret that as.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't until I became a police officer here, and we're like, well, when do you give a warning and when do you give a ticket? And the idea that the citations are to change behavior, or a warning is to change behavior. That's when we have interactions with people and they're violating. We want them to not do that anymore for the safety of the community. And that's a tough thing sometimes, where I know for a fact that if they had just said, Matt, that was naughty, don't do it again, I probably would have done it again. So like and when I think back to decisions I've made as a police officer, and I think about that, I'm like, I totally should have got a ticket there. That was the right decision on that officer's part.
But I think it also goes to show that you're the chief of police now. But growing up, you're human, and you have human flaws like everyone else. You weren't perfect. You didn't do everything always the right way, which the humanity and humility of law enforcement, I think some people need to recognize that we all make mistakes, but if you learn from those, they're correctable and they're not life debilitating. So I think with your story, I think it goes to show that if you learn and make a positive approach after those scenarios or those instances, it'll all work out fine. It's not something that'll keep you from your life goals or dreams.
Well, I think both of us through our careers have dealt with some really bad people that need to be imprisoned and should probably stay there for the rest of their life. And it's difficult to figure out how do they redeem themselves to society. But that's like 1% of the people I've investigated or arrested. And if our perspective was, we arrest you and you did something dumb, like 99% of people are good who do something dumb and then they're held accountable for it.
Yeah, a great point.
If our attitude was, they're dead to us or to society at that point, this job would be super depressing.
You're right. We have had contact or met people that have been very, very bad, but it's such a small percentage amount of people. But those, when you do come in contact with those people, you definitely realize it's an OMG moment that this person is not the run-of-the-mill that I've dealt with for the last decade type of scenario. But so now we're out of high school. You ventured out of the basement dwelling at your parents' home. Now you're in college, and you attend UW-Stevens Point. Is that correct?
Well, I started out at the UW here in UW Marathon County. So I went to school here for 3 semesters and realized like all these people I knew from going to high school that were starting their college career there, they went down one of 2 paths. It was, hey, let's party and here's where we're at, or hey, if I want to leave this school and go somewhere else at some point, I need to pay attention to what's going on. So I'd be lying if I said that first semester wasn't pretty rough. But, attended there for 3 semesters. And I was fortunate enough that at that time, when I was in high school, I got the opportunity to attend a Wisconsin youth conservation camp. And so for 5 weeks in the summer, there were numerous camps throughout the state of Wisconsin. And I went to Manitowish Waters, and it was this beautiful property. There'd be 100 high school kids there, and you were employed by as a high school kid, you're employed by the state, and you'd go out and work on projects, building boat landings, working in the forest, swinging axes. I'm not sure they'd get away with that today, to be like, hey kids, each of you grab an axe out of the back of the van. And that was a great opportunity with environmental education. I thought, I need to work for the DNR. I want to do this for the rest of my life. So after my first year of college, I applied back again to go there as a counselor or crew leader. And I got hired, and I got to go back to Manitowish Waters and spent the whole summer. So I'd spent 10, 11 weeks up there working for the DNR. Awesome experience. You're 19 years old, and they're like, here's a 15-passenger van and 15 teenagers, some of which I think a judge said, you can either go spend your summer incarcerated, or you can apply to this program with the state. All the way to kids who had just an interest in the environment and learning about that. And so you take all these kids, and you're driving off-road in a van into the middle of the woods, and you're going to prune pine trees, or you're going to do a release project where you're swinging axes, cut everything down other than white pine to allow the baby white pine trees to grow, to all sorts of crazy projects. And, I think that's where leadership became something that I started paying attention to, and having responsibility for other people. The wonderful thing that occurred when the state offered that opportunity to kids was there were kids that came there that they didn't feel positive about their futures. And I think every kid, when you're in high school, is wondering, like, well, where's my life going to end up? And it was an opportunity to show and take and be like, it can go another way. Hey, you're really good at this, or you're really good at that. And to lead those kids and to think positively, so they go back and finish their last year or so of high school, and they get to think, oh, well, there are other things other than what they showed up there thinking.
That's great.
There were kids who had never walked in the woods, who didn't understand the idea of going and swimming in a lake, and that was all brand new to them. So to watch people expand their understanding and their horizons. So like I said, that was the first opportunity where in an official capacity, they're like, you're in charge of these young people. And I'm like, now I look back, I'm like, I was 19 and you gave me the keys to this thing. So I did that for 2 years, and spent my summers up there and had a ball. Learned a lot. Tried not to break too many rules. I will tell you that the highlight of that is the guy that ran the whole thing, the director of this camp, owned horses back at home.
Oh, good golly.
And he would lease his horses.
Was it Yasha?
No. But he would lease his horses to a YMCA camp down the road. And so if we weren't working or didn't have responsibilities, we had free reign to go take these horses. Like, I don't know anything about riding a horse. And the people that did would be like, they'd saddle the thing up and they'd be like, climb on, Matt. And hey, pull back, whoa, move it this way, that way. And I learned, like, don't do the math on this, but I learned that if you ride a horse up to a bar in northern Wisconsin and tie that horse up to the front of the bar and walk in, you don't pay for a drink. People think that's so cool. But at the end of the day, that was where it said to me, hey, where should I go to college? Where should I transfer to? And, well, I'm going to go to Stevens Point because they're the university that has, everyone that works for the DNR goes to Stevens Point. You can do forestry or wildlife or all these other majors. DNR wardens frequently go to Stevens Point. So I transferred there and was a College of Natural Resources major for a semester.
And then from what I understand and remember, then you shortly thereafter transitioned to a sociology major.
You're close.
Okay.
It took me a semester of taking biology and forestry classes and memorizing scientific names for trees. That, hey, maybe this isn't what I want to do for the rest of my life. So I found myself really not knowing what I want to do. And I took some communications classes, or I took a communications class and ended up talking to one of the professors, and he's like, "What are you going to do, Matt?" I'm like, "I got no idea, man." And he says, a degree in communications, of course he was selling it, a degree in communications you can do anything with that. And I thought, oh, okay. And started taking classes and emphasized an organizational communication and interpersonal communication. And people often say, well, like, what's that? And I'm like, I'm not sure, but I have a degree in it. And like our previous chief, Bliven, would be like, that was the perfect degree.
Yeah, everyone that knows you, I think I would agree that communications, that's in your wheelhouse, for lack of better terms. It fits you like like peanut butter and jelly.
So, hey, I should mention that I move into the dorms when I moved to Stevens Point, and these two friends, Matt and Nick, like them, Woody and Sweeney, right? They're split in a room on the floor above. I see them and start hanging with them, and I get introduced to Cindy, who shortly thereafter
was it Sweeney and Woody that introduced you to Cindy?
Yeah. So this is how things work. Like, Woody's dating someone who has friends, and I'm like, hey, Shannon, maybe you want to introduce me to some of her friends while I'm down here. And so I meet Cindy. I'm 19 at this time, and I was married to Cindy at 21. So that worked out well for me. Graduated 4 years, well, close to graduated. Cindy graduated. I needed 2 classes. And so we knew we were going to get married, and we wanted to get married right away. And we moved to Wausau, and I went back to the extension, or UW Marathon County, that's now UW Stevens Point Extension. And my original plan, for those of you that know me, would be like, that's no surprise. I was like, well, this is easy. I just need 6 credits, and they could be in anything. All my requirements were done. I just needed 6 credits. So originally my plan was to sign up for 6 gym classes. And I'd be like, I'll just get in great shape in this semester and go work out a lot. And then I got talked out of that. Like, that's a lot of money to spend for 6 gym classes, Matt. So I ended up taking a history and a computer class while I was here, and then ultimately graduated at that point. Still graduated from Point, but
at that time, were you working in a security capacity?
Yeah, so my folks owned a security and private investigation company. And upon leaving Stevens Point, I went to work with them, kind of. I jumped right into like, hey, why don't you run this and we'll relax a little bit, or try to. And that was a great experience. I learned that being responsible for other people and
how many people were you responsible for at the time? How many people were employed?
Oh, probably somewhere between 30 and 40 would be my guess.
That's a lot for a 19, 20-year-old to...
Yeah, and like I felt like I was successful at it, except that I knew it was a job. I wasn't fulfilled with it. And so a lot of it was, hey, you're hiring people. It's a low-paying job in security at that time here. So you're trying to find people that they're responsible for things that are worth a lot of money. So trying to hire and manage and schedule those individuals. But the investigative end of the company private investigation in Wisconsin isn't, hey, is my husband or wife cheating on me? It's insurance companies that you're trying to identify workers' comp fraud and doing surveillance, and companies that were dealing with internal theft, or they're like, hey, we should be making more money than we're bringing in. Can you come in and help us try and figure out why we're not? And so that was work I did for several years, and was just kind of at a place where, like, things are good. Like, things weren't bad.
Yeah, I remember the first summer after I was hired, we are working the fair detail. And I don't recall if it was the 4th of July fair or the August fair, but we're going down. We walk past the beer tent, and you were your security company was providing security, checking IDs for the beer tent. I remember talking to you at that point in time, and I was like, "Oh, he seems to be doing well." And it was shortly after you applied at Wausau PD and got hired. It was like,
yeah. On the funny end of things, so one of my friends in college, Andy Radiz, right, was an officer here. Like graduated from college, got hired here. I think he got hired in '96, if I remember correctly. Yep. And so we connect when I moved back to Wausau, and he's an officer here, and just one day he's like, "Hey, do you want to come ride along?" And I'm like, "Sure." At that time, my wife is now pregnant with our first child. So you would have been a new officer because this was 1999. Probably late summer. And so I ride along with him. He worked second shift. And now through my lens with some context, I'm like, what a boring shift. Like we went to an alarm, like we wrote one speeding ticket and a couple of calls where I sit in the car. But there was something about that where I thought, this is cool. And he's like, hey, we're hiring. And so that started stewing in my head. And I remember going to my wife and being like, hey, I think I'm going to apply to the Wausau Police Department. And it wouldn't surprise me if in her mind, she's just laughing, thinking, yeah, whatever. And I just remember saying, like, listen, we're not going to move for me to be a police officer. So, like, if this works out, it's got to be his plan for us. And if they don't hire me, then it wasn't meant to be, and I'll continue doing what I'm doing or find something else. And I didn't realize at that point in time, like they were hiring 5 officers, and that there would be over 300 applicants for 5 jobs. So I apply. They're like, hey, come take the test. It's over at the tech. Followed up with what is just an incredibly rigorous and drawn-out hiring process, because I took that test like early October '99 and got hired March 10th of 2000. So we're looking at a 5 or 6 month hiring process, with one moment in that process that I thought, uh-oh, they're not going to hire me. So there's a background investigation being done, and you know this, like, here's a guy whose job it is to learn everything about you. We had to have a conversation about a puddle at the back of Wausau East. And at one point I get called in and he says, hey, how much time do you spend in Fond du Lac? And I'm like, none. And he's like, I need the truth. Now I'm concerned. And I said, well, I've driven past Fond du Lac, but I don't recall ever stopping there. He says, hey, you got to be honest with me. And I have no idea what he's talking about. And as it turns out, there is a Matthew Barnes who's a felon.
The doppelganger.
Yeah, who's, as it turns out, has the same birthday.
Oh, good golly.
Just a different middle initial. And he's like, well, what about this? And I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Like, that's not me. Like, and I'm like, I'm screwed. Like, they have all these people. So I could.
Do you remember who did the background? Who was
Oh, that was Roy Umlauf.
Oh, okay.
So I got Roy in there. He's kind of putting the screws to me, and I'm like, I'm done. They're not going to hire me. Well, obviously that's not what happened, but got the opportunity, and everyone that knew me was like, "You're going to go do what?" And it turned out to be one of the best things that's ever happened to me. I tell people all the time, I feel like I won the career lottery, because from that time until now, there hasn't been a time that I feel like I should be doing something different.
That's great. I mean, that's really what life's all about, right? Just feeling like you are in the career profession that you were meant to be in. So you had all this background experience as you came in to 2000 and you were offered the position of the Wausau Police Department. It sounds like your leadership skills were kind of developing from a young age from the roles and tasks, jobs that you've had. as you were hired, you kind of started jumping through the ranks and being assigned to different duties and roles fairly early in your career. So you were hired, you became an FTO officer fairly early on, a drug recognition expert. Then you transitioned to the Joint Drug Unit with the Sheriff's Department.
That was a short stint.
It was a stint. It was a cup of coffee. You had a cup of coffee there.
I mean, I got kicked out.
Well, I wasn't going to, bring that part up, but you were a part of a unit that got disbanded. But however, you came out of there glowing because you transitioned to the Detective Bureau right after. Worked some great cases to include a cold case homicide.
That was the first case given to me.
I mean, that right there is monumental, and you're one of only a handful of people that have been involved in solving a cold case homicide at the Wausau Police Department. So, I mean, you're not only the chief of police, but you're also in a fine niche, in a fine company of certain roles and cases throughout the history of the PD within the city.
I mean, that was an interesting dynamic where I think a lot of people had been assigned that case, and it's a super sad scenario. There were surviving victims, like we had there were children of it was the Rhonda Murtis homicide, and Rhonda had 2 children who I stay in like a little bit of contact thanks to social media, at least with one of them right now, who's doing great. And I just remember getting assigned this, and I'm like, well, what do I know about this? And I had great leaders to be able to use as mentors who could help walk me through that. And I think one of the things that benefited us, like,
who specifically would you credit and give kudos to for?
Well, I think Greg Hagenbusher, who was the captain of the Detective Bureau at that time, who's like, hey, you're going to do this, Matt. I mean, to be honest with you, I wasn't a detective yet. They were trying to figure out what to do with me after getting the boot from the drug unit. I didn't break the law by any chance. Like this was, this wasn't a criminal type thing. It just there were some conflicts that occurred in there, and for the betterment of the community, they're like, we're gonna start over with this. So I come back here, and they're like, there is going to be a detective opening, and what are we going to do with you? Well, in the meantime, you can start working on leads. So I got the opportunity to have people be like, here's how you do this and that. Ultimately, shortly thereafter, got promoted to detective. But science was really changing. And I remember when I talked about like going to school and memorizing stuff for forestry and scientific names, like not necessarily my strong suit, but DNA was new. And so this case had already been run through DNA stuff, but then there's new DNA called YSTR DNA. And it follows the male chromosome in DNA. And that's a lot of information, but that technology allowed us to ultimately get a conviction in that case. So early in my career to be able to be involved in something like that. And although I was the lead on that, like it wouldn't be fair to take credit for that because there were a whole lot of people here and with the state who were involved in that case. DCI and really helping us bring all the resources together to secure conviction. But at the end of the day, it boiled down to the use of DNA, mitochondrial DNA, YSTR DNA, and that was all new, relatively new technology, at least was new to the Wausau Police Department at that time. And so that was a great experience. And I think one of the things being involved in a case like that, and I know you have been involved in cases like that as well, is you're terrified because you don't want to let a family member down. You want justice for them. And when you're successful, especially that first time, you get this confidence that you can do it and you can do it well and bring justice to those families. And then I think it for me, it just changes your outlook on how you look at your role at the police department.
Yeah, and I think you hit a biggie with that explanation. And so you have your individual role and input within that case, which was huge. But teamwork, I think, is vital within any police department, and specifically here at Wausau PD with all the different resources we have. So I think touching on teamwork to solve that case is huge, because it does take a village to raise a family, for lack of better terms. And you have prosecutors, DCI, a bunch of people helping out with the end result of hoping to bring closure and justice for the victim and the victim's family. So, yeah, great job on that all around.
So I think about that case, and so then the time comes, we make an arrest, and preparing to make an arrest, I would say two people that really positively impacted me were the district attorney at that time, Joe Falstead, and assistant district attorney who became district attorney, Ken Heimerman. And I'll never forget the day we're moving forward with this case, and Joe Falstead looks at me and says, "Are you in over your head?" And I looked at her and I said, "Way over my head." She's like, "Okay, well, we're going to make this work." And so without people like in that district, the relationship between the police department and the district attorney's office, if that's not good, there's not success. And so I just feel like when I think about those major cases and the things we've done, if it weren't for that relationship and those individuals being supportive, like I don't think we would necessarily see those same outcomes. So, like, yep, a lot of running around doing stuff, but that in and of itself, it was good work, but it doesn't get us to the finish line. It's that relationship and that teamwork between everyone that gets us to where we want to be.
That's excellent. So that was your detective stint. You became detective lieutenant shortly after that.
You're close.
Oh, I'm sorry, patrol captain.
Well, no? I left.
Where am I here? I'm lost now.
I mean, I reached a point, and I think this happens for not everyone, but for a lot of people. Like, I loved being a detective, and there came a point in time when I'd look at things happening here, and I just remember, and I don't remember if it was Jeff Hardell at the time. Maybe it was Ben Bliven, who was a lieutenant at the time. I remember going to them and being like, "Let me tell you what this place needs." And they're like, "Well, do you want to have more influence in changing and whatever it is you think this place needs, then you got to consider leaving the detective bureau." And like, so people can appreciate, as a detective, it's kind of like banker hours, right? Monday through Friday, 8 to 4, a lot of freedom to take off. And when you shift to patrol work, you're now working weekends, you're working odd hours. My first year as a patrol lieutenant, every single week I would work at least one shift of all 3 shifts, because I'm a low guy. I go from, hey, I can kind of set my own hours and schedule, to like, that's a big impact on family. And
do you remember how old the kids were when you transitioned to patrol lieutenant?
Not old enough. I mean, my guess is they were late elementary school. Maybe one in, 3rd to 6th, 7th grade, something like that.
I think with a lot of the younger people we hire now, it seems like time off and family is important, but I think it's a great reminder to everyone that you didn't just get hired and all of a sudden now you're the chief of police. I mean, it was a grind, and family sacrifices. Like, this is an example of young kids. You're doing shift work with patrol. I mean, so you've been there, you've done it, and I mean, it goes to show that just keep your nose down and keep the vision, and good things will happen.
Yeah, I mean, if my family weren't supportive of my career, like, I would not be chief right now, because I wouldn't have left the detective bureau. But, I think that you brought up, the sacrifice that occurs. And I think this is this generational difference that occurs. And maybe you can either confirm that this occurred with you. We look at often many of these young people right now, and we're like, man, they prioritize their personal time, and they don't want to do these things, and they don't have the patience that we had to have. I mean, we would look at it and be like, hey, in 10 years, we can work day shift. And they're like, I don't want to work night shift, like that negative. and because that's what their wants are. And we might look at that in a critical eye. And I just remember being a new person here and having an officer opinion come to me and be like, "You new guys don't get it." And I'm like, "Well, what don't I get?"
Yep.
They're like, "You didn't walk the beat." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?"
You didn't share a radio.
When I started, we didn't get a car. We left the police department walking, and we had our walking beats. And I was like, "Man, I'm not sure I'd be a cop if I had to spend 5 years." And then the older guys would argue about how many years did you have to walk the beat for?
Those were always great stories to listen when they started telling war stories of walking the beat and checking doors and all the shenanigans that had gone on.
And when there was a major call and you needed additional officers, the officers that were assigned squads had to drive around and pick up the officers walking the beat, throw them in the car, and then respond to the call. So times change. The generations and the expectations of our staff change. And one of the things I wrap my head around before becoming chief, but when you get in a leadership position here, is I'm not going to change a generation. So we need to be able to lead our way to meet the expectations of our staff and still be able to meet the expectations and the job we have to do with the community. And that's not an easy thing to do, to have people be satisfied with their job and their career. So, like, that's something we talk about all the time. And then anytime I start to get on my high horse, I think back to 20 years ago with, like, the older guys used to look at us and be like, "Those guys got it so good. I can't believe they think they deserve this or that." And so I think that's probably the norm. It's just a little bit different circumstances.
Yeah. So up to this point in time, what do you think your biggest influence as a leader has been with the Wausau Police Department?
I mean, that question's probably best answered by people that are being led. I could be way off base here, but when I think about one of the things that I had success with that I think have impacted people here is a desire to take care of the staff here and try and have us be progressive and have us have some cool things. So whether that's equipment or a really cool smoker grill or whatever it might look like here, when you think about the fitness center in the basement here. So throughout my career, I've just kind of landed. Maybe it's because I have a skill set where we come up with ideas and things that would make this a better place or make our staff more equipped to do their job. And often people look at it and they're like, "Well, we're never going to get that." And I've seemed to be able to find a way to get those things.
Yeah, if you actually break it down, you've really had your fingers in like all the good stuff that's gone on here in the last 25 years. I mean, the fitness room, that probably would not be like it is today if it wasn't for all of your input and sweat and
I learned how to hang drywall and mud and tape in our fitness center. Because that's something we wanted, and there wasn't anyone to hang the drywall. So another older officer that used to work in the drywall business is like, "Come on, we'll go hang it." So come in on a Saturday and hang drywall, and those are things where to just have an idea that, like, well, you think about what our vision is here is to be regarded as a standard of excellence, and like, what is excellence and what's going to make this a better place to be where people can thrive, and we figure out what that is. And I've just never accepted the idea that, well, we don't have any money for that. We can't find that. And so to find funding sources and to get support and be involved in those things, I think that's what helped me get leadership positions here. And they're like, "Oh, well, number one, they're righteous reasons. It's a good reason to do those things." And then to be able to garner support and build momentum around different initiatives, that's something that I think is in my wheelhouse.
Yeah, I would agree. So we're into Friday afternoon here, or early afternoon, late morning. I'm assuming tonight's going to be a fish fry night for the Barnes clan. Where's the fish fry going to happen tonight?
Well, I would say that is a frequent occurrence. Usually by early afternoon, there's a text chain going out with friends and saying, hey, who wants to go get fish tonight? I mean, I live down in southern Marathon County, south of Mosinee, so there's several places around Mosinee. People are like, well, shouldn't you live in the city? And I'll tell you, I think there's value in living close enough to the police department that you work in. But for my own mental health, I needed to be surrounded by trees. I can't necessarily see my neighbors from where I live on any side of my house, and that's something we always wanted. And honestly, based on some of the cases and some of the drug work, maybe you've experienced this where I'm in Walmart with my little kids with a shopping list, and I don't know where anything is, wandering around, and people I arrested the week before decide they want to talk about their case with me with my kids sitting there.
Routinely. They joke about it all the time because they love those moments. They just are fascinated when that happens.
So when I'm off to not have to worry about that, and I've lived there for 20 years, that's been a benefit to me. But
so are you a baked or a fried fish guy?
Oh, you got to fry it.
Got to fry it.
If you're going to go, then go. Right.
And your beer of choice on fish fry night is?
Blue Moon.
Blue Moon?
With an orange. I mean,
do you put an orange into the Blue Moon?
Well, generally the bartender does, but I've grown to appreciate that.
And at what point do you transition then from Blue Moon to the short glass?
Well, it depends on what the diet mode is at that time. So I was surprised to find out the short glass, generally what you pour into that, doesn't have carbs. And so I always felt like if I'm going to drink bourbon, like that's kind of healthy compared to drinking a Blue Moon.
I think you hit it on the head. Bourbon is healthy for you. We answered it here, folks.
Ta-da! Like that'll probably get cut, right, Ethan? You're going to have to edit that out. Like those guys are encouraging people to go drinking.
Well, if you're 21 or older.
Correct.
We would encourage you to explore some of Wisconsin's finest.
And if you're looking for a healthy option to beer, it sounds like bourbon is the way to go.
But drink responsibly and drink moderately.
And don't drive. Don't drink and drive.
Whatever you do not drink and drive. Well,
where were we at? Like patrol lieutenant, right?
Yes, patrol lieutenant.
I spent time in the drug unit, and I really enjoyed the work that we did, so I ended up being a night shift patrol lieutenant here, and many of the skills to get search warrants and hold our drug dealers and users in this community accountable. I brought that to the shift, and we were getting neighborhood complaints all the time about the impact of drug use in their neighborhoods and their communities, impacting their quality of life. So we started taking those strategies from the drug unit and applying them to patrol work. And I remember the chief being like, hey, you're doing a great job on that. Like, keep that up. And I just remember looking at him going like, if you think this is good, imagine what it would look like if you just gave me a couple people and that's what we got to do full time.
Yeah, you were the pioneer and visionary behind what is now our community resource officer unit.
And at that time, I got to pick, and we did some really good things. I remember early in those days, this was just one of the highlights of my career where I felt like a tough guy, even though there's like nothing tough about me. We know, surprise, surprise. Generally speaking, if you're a drug dealer in Wausau, we know you're a drug dealer in Wausau. But we follow the Constitution, so it takes us a little work to hold you accountable. And I remember a neighborhood where the alderperson's calling me saying, Karen Kelbach, and she's like, Matt, these neighbors are so upset, they're calling me all the time. And I'm like, okay, well, we had this new CROW unit, community resource unit, that was designed to positively impact neighborhoods and to go knock on people's doors. And they come to the door, and I'm standing there as a police officer, I was a lieutenant, and I'd say, hey, my name's Matt Barnes, I'm a lieutenant with the police department. Hey, I got to tell you, your behavior here is really negatively impacting this community and this neighborhood. And I've been tasked with creating a drug-free Wausau, and they'd kind of chuckle. And I'd say, well, I don't know that we'll ever achieve that, but I'm going to start with you. So what I would like you to do is be a productive member of this community in this neighborhood. But if you don't, you're our new special project, and I'm relatively certain you're going to end up in the Marathon County Jail. So I just want to introduce myself to you, and they, of course, they blew us off. But then 2 weeks later, we're executing a search warrant on their house. We take their drugs away. We take them to jail, and I'll just never forget. We come walking out of this house, taking bad guys to jail and drugs, and we look out, and everyone's come out of their homes, and they're all standing in their front yards clapping. and I'm just like, it's at that moment that you realize, like, the work that we're doing makes a difference.
Yeah.
And so that, like, I mean, the fun for me was, who did I get to take down there with me to do work? Like, two incredibly high achieving individuals, one of which you might be married to. So I got Melinda Pauls and Ben Graham, and they're awesome, and they're hard workers, and they're super smart, and we were super successful. And every day the chief's like, keep it going. And I said, look at how successful we are with a lieutenant and 2 members. Imagine what it would look like if we had 3. And the answer was, well, we don't have any money for that. I'm like, well, what if I can find money? And so we utilized the graciousness of foundations that help create a financial pathway to be able to hire another. And then there's 3 down there, and that group is doing even better work. And I'm like, if 3 are great, imagine what could happen with 4.
Which is where we currently sit today.
Which is where we sit today, and we would, like, that's a scenario where they're like, hey, there's no way they're going to fund another officer. But then we don't accept that as, if we think that's what this community needs, we're going to find a way. And we were able to find a way with partners, both the city and the community and foundational partners. And so I feel like that's been really successful. And when I look back on that, I'm like, I got to play a role in that. And like in anything, when people that do something here that's really successful, they're like, hey, there's this other job opening up. And I was having the time of my life supervising that unit. But in the course of doing that, I got the opportunity to do things that an average lieutenant here doesn't do, working with the city and understanding budgets and stuff. And so a captain position opened up, something I had never considered. I thought, I'm not an administrator. I want to go kicking doors, and I want to work cases. But I got selected for that position, which was a patrol captain position. So kind of went investigative patrol, back to investigative, back to a patrol captain position. And that was where I learned how this department actually operates. Up until that point, I had no appreciation other than, hey, can we do this? And someone would say yes. But how it got paid for and how it stayed in with regulations and what reporting needed to be done. So I got to spend some time doing that, and always thinking, hey, you know where I really want to end up? I want to be the captain of the detective bureau. And like any officer here looks at the chessboard and says, okay, here's the captain. How old are they? And then you slide in, and they do this to me now. Maybe they do too. And they're like, hey, how old are you, Matt? And when are you going to retire? And they're planning their moves on the chessboard and trying to figure out what the future looks like. So at that point in time, I had the opportunity to laterally transfer from patrol captain to detective captain. And then really was where I thought, this is where I belong. I'll ride this position into the sunset and have these ideas on what that'll look like. And we're going to have the greatest detective bureau on the planet. And then all of a sudden, Chief Hardell, who had been awesome to me, like he was a mentor and taught me how to navigate different things within the city and the government, and how not to get too worked up over things, how we share similar personalities, and to accountability and how we communicate. And it just hadn't crossed my mind, like, hey, he ain't going to work here forever. So So there's a chief opportunity, and there were probably two people here, Ben Belivin and me, who were the two most senior in rank that they might consider to be a chief. And I remember Jeff Hardell coming into my office before he retired, and he said, hey, do you want to put in for chief? And I hadn't considered it, and I probably answered really quickly, but I think it was an honest answer with, yeah, I don't want to be chief. Like, no. And so Ben Belivin became chief. I supported him. Ben wanted to be chief, and he's got so many wonderful skills. Like, he was the guy to do that. And he was the deputy chief at that time, and I was the detective captain. And like, for people that can't appreciate this, like, Ben and I got hired on the same day at the same minute. And really, when I think about you, Ben and I, like, here's three guys all hired about the same time that have stayed with the department. And we're friends, and we appreciate, like, it's a great dynamic. And so I thought, hey, we're in great shape. Ben's going to be chief. Ben's a couple years younger than me. Ben says to me, you want to be deputy chief? I'm like, yeah, I'll be your deputy chief. I have no idea how to be
so
deputy chief.
You have the detective captain position. You think we're going to ride out your career and then you transition to the deputy chief? We have the same thought. You're going to ride out your career as a deputy chief?
I mean, honestly, I was terrified becoming deputy chief because, one, that wasn't what I've thought about at all during my career. And like, well, what does a deputy chief do?
But it had been kind of refreshing in the same breath. Like, you're learning something totally outside your comfort zone and wheelhouse, and it kind of maybe made you feel like you're a new officer again, for lack of better terms.
Yeah, I mean, I've been very fortunate because at different times in different positions in my career, it just has timed out that when there's that little feeling of like, hey, I figured this out, I'm doing this, I'm a little bored, then a new opportunity, and it starts you all over again where you're going to make dumb mistakes and you have to learn. And so I got to be deputy chief, and Ben was chief, and he's younger than me, and I'm going to retire before he retires. Like, this is it. I remember saying to my wife, like, well, I hope I don't get bored with this because there's nowhere to go. This is the position I'm going to have for the rest of my career. And was very fortunate in that Ben and I had the opportunity to run this department as partners. We'd been partnered in so many different ways all along. And so I think some of the staff here felt like, well, if I got a question for the chief, but the chief's not around, I can go ask the deputy chief. And the deputy chief isn't going to say, let's wait to see what the chief says.
Yeah, you're spot on with that.
I would just make a decision. And Ben was very supportive of those decisions. And so that worked really well for about 5 years. And I mean, I'm probably a little out of bounds, but I think he shared this where at one point Ben said, hey, I got offered this other job. And like, you ever have those moments where you're just like, uh-oh. And he's like, yeah, I turned him down. So fast forward, Ben and I are at a conference, and we had some time, and we're out wandering around the grounds where this conference is, and he's like, hey, like, we've been hanging out for a couple hours. Like, well, why were you just sitting waiting to tell me? And he's like, hey, there's something we should probably talk about. And I'm like, what's that? And he says, remember that job that I got offered and was looking at, and I decided no? And I'm like, oh, yeah. Like, really appreciated this is what I said to him. I'm like, I really appreciated it. Like, you took a lot of heat off me when you're like, but don't worry, I turned it down. I'm like, yeah, what about it? He says, yeah, well, I talked to him again, and they offered it again, and I accepted. And we're just walking, and then it's quiet for what was probably 15 seconds, but felt like 5 minutes. And then he says to me, like, well, what do you think? And I just remember looking at him going, how am I supposed to know what I think? Like, this isn't the plan, man.
Yeah. That was the house of cards came tumbling down after that. I think there were a lot of people, myself included, you talked about strategically planning the next few years and looking at retirement with our ages anyway, and that pathway changed drastically when he came out and said,
it was a surprise to me, and I think it was a surprise to everybody.
Everybody, yeah.
And Ben was a chief that people respected. They liked working for him. In his time as chief, it led our department in a positive direction. And so, I just remember later during that conference, I said to him, well, I got to be chief then. And he's like, I agree. And so going from never aspiring to be chief, and part of that being accepting the fact that that opportunity is not going to exist here. And people are like, why did you agree to be chief at that point? And there's a couple of factors that went into that. One, I felt confident enough that I have the knowledge, skills, and ability to be chief. Like, having been deputy chief for 5 years, I felt like, and being a deputy chief that got to partner with the chief and doing things, I was like, I felt confident that I can do this job. And an overwhelming desire to look at the last 23, 24 years here and where we were and where we're going as an organization, and recognizing that there's law enforcement around the state that often look at the Wausau Police Department and they're like, they are doing good things. We get, I think you know this, we get calls from other agencies that say, hey, can we send someone up there to look at how you're doing this? There's just a ton of examples of that. And the culture of this department, no department's got perfect culture, but this is a good place to work. And then I start thinking, I'm like, I've had my fingers in so much of those projects and being a member of a team that has helped accomplish that. And then I start thinking about all the staff that work here. Like, we're authorized 79 officers here. And so below me is like 70, at that point, 77, 78 people that I feel responsible to. And the idea that, I'll tell you a funny thing. I went to baby chief training officially it's Department of Justice new chief and sheriff training here like 3 weeks ago. And as we're introducing ourselves, I'm early in the introductions, and I'm like, hi, I'm Matt Barnes. I'm a relatively new chief of the city of Wausau. Maybe different than everyone else in the room, but never thought I would be a chief, didn't really aspire to that. But when the old chief left, I wasn't willing to let some retired officer from California or Illinois come up here and screw up our department. So there's 3 people at my table, me and 2 other chiefs. And so the next chief stands up and he introduces himself and he says, hi, I retired from such and such department in California, and now I'm a chief in Wisconsin. And I was like, uh-oh. Yeah. And the next guy stands up and says, hi, I'm chief so-and-so from this department in Wisconsin. I retired from my department in Illinois, and I came to Wisconsin to further my career and become a chief there.
Glad to see you made some friends right away at that training.
Yeah, and the funniest part, I'm like, well, I wasn't talking about you guys.
Yeah, clearly not you two, it was the other people.
But the point of that is, I feel an obligation to the community and to the officers here that I want us to continue on the same trajectory we've been on. I want us to come up with creative solutions to complex problems, for them to be engaged and empowered to do that.
And
wasn't confident that would happen with someone else.
With your background too, you can relate to everyone at the department with the roles and assignments that you've had, and the things that you've had your fingers involved with. I can't think of one area or aspect of the police department where if something comes up or an issue comes up or a problem comes up that you can't look at it and say, well, when I was in that area, when I was in that unit, we kind of worked it this way or that way. You're able to personalize all these troubleshooting scenarios, and I think that is a huge benefit for not only the young officers that we have, but for the city in general. You were the right man for the job at the right time. And coming from leadership from Jeff and from Ben, I mean, you got big shoes to fill, but I think we got the right man in the job.
Yeah, I mean, there was a competitive process, and there were really good candidates that applied to be chief here. And I just remember telling the Police and Fire Commission that, the interview gets done and, like, you got anything else you want to add? And I shared with them, like, here's how long I anticipate my career lasting here. And I made the point, like, if you're looking for a change agent for this department to come in and turn things upside down and do things a different way, like, I'm not your guy. If you want someone that's committed to the things we've already been doing and continuing to build on those and try and expand that, then please give me the job, because I think we're doing the right things here, and we've been doing the right things, and we're heading in the right direction. Of course, they gave me the job, so that was the easy part. The hard part's actually, like, not letting anyone down and making sure that we continue in that direction. And
with that direction, it is today, February 16th. You said March 10th was your hire date. So in less than a month, it'll be 24 years that you've been employed as an officer with the city of Wausau.
It feels it doesn't feel like 24 years.
Feels like 4.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy how fast it goes. With coming on 24 years and now being the chief of the Wausau Police Department, what do you want your legacy to be?
Well, that's a tough one. I think there's a couple different lanes to look at that. Like, I would consider it a failure that when I retire, if the next chief isn't someone employed here right now. So
I agree with that 100%.
So I want, and I'm constantly thinking about, how do we develop leaders at every level within this department to be able to continue down the same path that we have, so that we've been doing for the last 20 years. So that's, I want 3 or 4 candidates that can show up to the PFC and make their decision really difficult for who's going to be the next chief. That could be part of the legacy. And
I think with that goal in mind, I think and I'll say you, because ultimately you being the chief, you sign off on anyone who's hired at the department. But everyone who's been hired here in the last, I'll say even, it's been longer than 5 years, but I would say just even with that time frame, the candidates and the people that you have hired are so different, and they come from so many different backgrounds. With your vision of continuing to have a leader in-house to keep driving the ship in the right direction, I think the way you've hired, I think you have set this department up for success moving forward for many years.
Well, a lot of departments, I would say, when I just remember being told this when I got hired, we're in a meeting, we're coming up with a plan for how we're going to go address some tactical situation. And, I'd been here like 15 months and a week. So 3 weeks to being off probation. And I chime in this meeting. Like, these are the people I've been working with, the lieutenant. And I just remember the lieutenant working at me like, "Hey, are you off probation yet?" And I said, "No, like a couple weeks." And he's like, "That's what I thought. So don't talk." and we're very different today.
Very much different.
Where we are going to invest in informal and formal leadership training for our staff at every level. And that's how we're going to develop to be able to have succession planning at all these levels. And some of it is a willingness to fail. So we're going to experiment with things. Like, there isn't a book that says, "Oh, here's this problem your community's having. Here's what you need to do." You can look at other places and be well-read and pay attention to it. But sometimes you have to step out on the ledge and be like, we're just going to jump in the deep end and let's see if it works. And if it doesn't work, that's okay. We can go back to the drawing board, and we don't give up. And that's an awkward way of thinking, where everyone wants to know, well, we're going to do this and it has to work. And if it doesn't work, someone's in trouble. Where I want this department to function in such a way that here's a problem we're facing, And hey, let's throw something against the wall and see if it sticks. And if it doesn't, we're going to throw something else against the wall because the problem needs to go away.
Yeah, I think ultimately that's a great approach. At the end of the day, the problem needs to get solved.
I think it should be commented that, and I don't know how many chiefs feel this way throughout the state, but you're like, what do you want your legacy to be? Obviously, it's that we maintain stability. But in addition to that, I remember saying this when I got hired, and a couple years later, like, holy crap, I was having so much fun right away. Like, I can't believe I get paid to do this. Like, almost like I want to keep that to myself, because then maybe they'll be like, oh, do you want to volunteer to do this and not get a paycheck? And I've been fortunate that, not necessarily with that amount of excitement, but I have felt that way through my career. And not everyone gets to feel that way through their whole career. And how do we impact that? Like, this job is super hard. It's traumatic. You and I both know our staff get to see the worst of society. And but at the same time, this job can be a lot of fun. And so what would be a great legacy is we do great work for great reasons for a great community and have a ball doing it. And if we can do that, we're going to have staff working super hard and excited to come to work. So
I think we got a new slogan.
If at my retirement party, assuming a few people show up to it, if some of them feel like, hey, Matt played a big role in making this job fun, like, I'll ride off into the sunset with a smile on my face.
Well,
you're going to thank me for coming on?
Thank you for coming on the show.
Oh, well,
Barnes.
I was happy to be here. You know, Ethan's been being like, Matt, I'd like to try podcast format, and I'd like you involved in it, like, for a year. And I'm like, we'll get to that, Ethan. We'll get to that. Well, I would like to thank you, Nate, for your hosting abilities and making me mildly uncomfortable a couple times through this, but always making it fun.
Well, here's to you and the community. Adios.
Now we got to figure out what you're going to do next. How do you trump this?